There is no book on leadership. There is no guideline or framework or step-by-step thing of like, do this now, do this now, do this now, do this now. Like, you could go on YouTube and how do I run a Facebook ad? Well, I follow this step-by-step guide. There isn't that when it comes to leadership. You have to be invested in growing in that area. It is an absolute must if you're gonna create anything successful. Be willing to play the long game, not the short game. You don't win in business. The goal with business should be that the business always continues on. It's like marriage, you can't win at marriage. The goal with marriage is that the marriage continues to grow and get better forever.
Welcome to the Fitness CEO Podcast.
Hey friends, welcome back to another amazing episode of the Fitness CEO Podcast. If you get value today, give this a like and subscribe and share this with someone in need. Now to introduce today's guest, who's a dear friend of mine, who owns 3 locations, going on even more with his brother, Jarred Kotkas, our Director of Marketing, and he's been in our brand since 2015, been one of our top performers. Going to talk to you about leadership, going to talk to you about business systems, operations, and ultimately scaling your business. So without further ado, I want to welcome to the show my friend, Mr. Jarred Kotkas. My man, Jarred Kotkas, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, so very excited and a long time coming. We're here live in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a little off studio, if you will, but I have the opportunity to connect. And shoot, man, it's been many years. I think you joined the brand back in 2015, 16. So We've known each other for quite some time. And you're a multi-location owner, done incredible things. Why don't you just give a little bit of a context to the audience? That way they know how you started with FitBody and really, why you became a gym owner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost speaking, because I think it's a funny story, but when I first met you was actually at my first FitBody World Conference. And at the time I was new coming in, didn't know anyone. And probably within the first day, I had 3 people tap me on the shoulder and go, "Bryce?" And didn't know anything of you or who you were, but that was my introduction to the famous Bryce. And so that's that. But yeah, got in.
Before we even go in there, and this is such a funny story, even that conference, my wife Tatiana comes up and she's like, "Bryce, you'll never believe this. Like, I ran into a guy who also has a brother, but his name's Jarred. He's from Canada. He looks exactly like you." So even my wife saw the similarities.
Yeah, there you go.
In any case.
Yeah, so we got in to FitBody into the brand, end of 2015. Launched our first location in Lethbridge. Really the backstory, if you've watched this podcast for any length of time, you may have actually seen my brother on it, Joel, who's phenomenal into marketing and sales. And basically he used to be a geophysicist and was getting to that point where he was just sick of the 9 to the 5, sick of the corporate, and his passion was always in nutrition and fitness. And so at the time, he went and got a precision nutrition certification and started doing nutrition coaching on the side as just kind of a passion hobby. Went down to a conference to learn about how to start an online kind of nutrition coaching that was put on by Jay Ferrugio. And Bedros happened to be a main speaker on stage and just kind of mentioned in passing, who here's a FitBody owner, kind of never really thought anything of it. A couple of years later said, you know what, I'm really done with kind of corporate, stress, grind, all that kind of stuff, want to do my own thing. Kind of backtracked, look into what is FitBody, found it, decided at the time just where he was with his life, his family, couldn't do it on his own. Reached out to me. I was just finishing up my university degree in neuroscience and kind of figuring out what did I want to do with that. And it was just perfect timing. And I just said, let's do it. Let's go all in. And now, however many years later, 7.5 years later, here we are 3 locations later, and we're hoping to grow on that.
Totally, and like 2 of the most successful owners of the brand. It's incredible to see their growth. So big shout out to the accolades there, as I know I just hit in the intro as well. But let me ask you this before, and obviously you told the story of Joel going to the conference and kind of like gave you insight in FitBody. You're going to get a degree in neuroscience, which is just incredible. What were you planning on doing if it wasn't for FitBody? I'm just curious, like where your mind was and like how you made that switch.
Yeah. So originally when I went into university, I was thinking something medical, whether it be doctor, dentistry, something like that. So I actually started my degree in biochemistry. And then after about a year, I decided like I really didn't love biochemistry. So my next thing was, what other degree could I pursue that more aligned with what I believed I would really enjoy and my passion, while still giving me the ability to pursue, going into medical school or dentistry or something like that. And that's where I fell into neuroscience. So really enjoyed neuroscience, loved the program. But probably around year 3.5, I decided I don't know if I actually do want to go into dentistry. Specifically, I first actually decided I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want to be on call. I didn't want to work nights. I didn't want to work a 24-hour shift. So I first made the decision, don't want to be a doctor. So then I kind of went down maybe dentistry. And I think actually, so much time has passed and I start to forget things, but I think out that year after university, dentistry was still potentially on the table. But then when I was, like I said, taking a year off to figure out what I was going to pursue, and then when Joel presented this opportunity, it was kind of like a I can't not do it opportunity. And a funny story, I actually remember, always been involved in sports, high-level sports, fitness, nutrition, all that kind of stuff. And I actually remember in university working out with a buddy in the gym and saying kind of jokingly, oh man, wouldn't it be cool to own a gym? And then it just kind of blew away because it was that's never an opportunity.
Right.
And then now here we are.
Yeah, it turns out it was.
Yeah.
I want to jump in actually, so thanks for that. But it's interesting, family dynamic. So I work with my brother, it's exceptionally well. You do as well, but sometimes that isn't always necessarily the case. So, when you jumped in, how did you define the roles, responsibilities, the investment, kind of what all that looked like? And I share this, I'm curious because there's a lot of people that want to jump in with their family who've done really, really well, but it can also be a slippery slope. So I'm curious what that conversation, what the breakdown, what the roles and responsibilities then, and then what are they like now? How's it evolved?
So I guess jumping in first and foremost is Joel and I had never run a business before. We had no idea what to do, how to do it, or anything of the sort. And for anyone out there that is hesitant because of that, I have to say you just have to take the first step. It's always going to be scary. You will never have it figured out. You just got to do it and learn along the way. In terms of our roles and our dynamic, Joel and I mean, as you know, are just very similar people. And so there wasn't necessarily a specific role coming into it where it's oh, you fit this because you're good with numbers and you're good with people, and it just kind of came out.
Right.
It actually just ended up coming out geographically in the fact that when we opened our first location, Joel was still doing his geophysics job full time, and he was in a completely different city from our location. So the question started being, what can you do virtually where you are? And so it was kind of all the back-end administrative, the marketing, email, ad copy, all that kind of stuff. And then I was doing all the stuff that could be done in person, the administrative stuff, coaching, all of that. And
he still had his geophysicist role at the time.
Yeah.
So he was doing that kind of offline stuff while you just had the ability to jump in.
Yeah.
You just had graduated school. Did you have another gig, or were you able to go in full time?
Yeah, no, for me, I was fortunate enough, kind of in that year off, I actually had gotten a health coaching certification and was doing kind of an online health coaching thing as a side gig. And I was actually working at my ex-girlfriend at the time. Her parents had a company. It was just one of those, it was just a job kind of thing where I was figuring out what to do. Mm-hmm. And then was fortunate enough that I think at the time I was 21, 22. So when we decided to go all in on this, I was actually fortunate enough, I ended up moving back in with my parents so that, I could take this on, be the boots on the ground, so to speak, doing those super long days as we all do in this industry. But, be able to make that living, and so made it work.
Copy that. All right, so kind of jumping in, I mean, you had the availability to jump in. Joel's kind of doing the back end offline stuff. If you can remember, because this is, back in 2016 timeframe, what were those first responsibilities? What was it like from your perspective to kind of get the gym off the ground, and what was your role? And then how has that changed over the last 7 years?
Mm-hmm. Really, when we jumped in, it was anything and everything that needed to be done in-house. So that was, I was coaching a lot. I was the coach, I was the janitor, I was doing, the data entry, because at that point in time, there wasn't a lot of virtual or digital contracts or things that could just be sent virtually over to Joel. I was, taking it, entering it all into the system, doing follow-up, doing the sales meetings with new potential leads and clients, really running the ship in the day-to-day operations, so to speak. And as we've transitioned from kind of those initial beginnings, so to speak, kind of our roles have stayed the same. And to your point of family getting into business, I think for us, that has actually what has allowed us to be so successful, because we have really defined roles and responsibilities and kind of stay out of each other's way. So as you know, Joel is like marketing and sales, and that's his avenue, that's his lane. And then for me, I'm everything operations. Now the major change now is just as we've grown, as we've had the ability to bring on awesome team members. Now for me at least, it's not working in the business as much as now being able to work on the business. So now I'm really hands-off when it comes to working directly with clients, but now I'm hands-on working directly with our team.
Cool. Well, I want to jump into a little bit of that, your strong suits. You have many, but leadership is the first and foremost that comes to mind, especially if you grow and expand. So I also want to talk about what it's like being a multi-location owner as well. But I want to dive back into the last question, at least for now, about the brother situation, because I work with my brother really, really well. It's a match made in heaven in many ways, but also too, we're brothers and we butt heads and we kind of get at it too. So give me the best part from your perspective about working with a brother, and then shoot the audience straight. Like, what's the most challenging thing? Because I think that's just important for know. Because again, many family members join together with great success, but also too, there's challenges.
I think the strength is that you have that foundational relationship that will always be there. Like, you have the trust in that person, knowing that they always have your back. Like, they aren't going anywhere, no matter how bad it gets, and which it happens. That's part of business. I mean, we just went through a pandemic where we were literally shut down for 15 months in a 2-year period, and you just know that they're there side by side, ready to fight that battle with you, no matter how hard things get. And I'm not saying that maybe team members won't, but they have the ability to exit.
It's just a whole other level.
It's a different dynamic. But on the flip side of that, that relationship and that foundation that brings those benefits also can sneak in to other areas where you may not engage in a level of conflict with a normal team member that you may with your brother or your family member, because that relationship is there. But I think one thing and a message to people that are thinking about getting into it with their family, I think you need to have that conversation and those expectations set first going into it. So for us, when we did this, Joel and I straight out the gate said, like, our relationship comes first and foremost, no matter what. If the business at any point in time gets in the way of that, we'll step away from the business. And just setting those clear expectations on going into it. And I mean, this is expectations are everything. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I'm gonna shit to the camera here. That's just so important. Manage the expectations, making sure everything's clearly written out, agreed upon, because that's really the name of the game. And I've seen it done really well with my family, specifically my brother Barrett, and I've seen you guys just thrive over the years, which has been incredible. So
thank you.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about your strengths, but before I do, being that you've had so much success, you're at this time of this basically, being shot out, you'll have 4 locations in your belt, which is just phenomenal. If you can just showcase the audience the differences, what it was like running one location and then to expanding to now what will be 4.
It's exponentially different. When you're running one location, you have the ability to be there at all times. Whether that is when you're starting out and you're on the grounds for your clients, or even if you just have the desire to just have one really successful location, which is totally fine, you still have the ability to be there for your team, or if a team gets sick or a manager gets sick or leaves or whatever it is, you still have the ability to step in and be there. When you're a multi-location owner, it's not possible. You can't be at 5 locations at the same time. So from that perspective, you really have to do a couple things that I think is extremely important. Is number one, systems and processes. They have to be documented, they have to be in place. And then the most important part is that you have an awesome team that is in place to run those systems and processes. And I would say that's the biggest gap between the two. And so when you're first starting out, you're acquiring skill sets. And you can be successful in one location by developing skill sets, how to sell, how to run an awesome workout, how to all that kind of stuff, how to market. But when you transition from one location to many, the biggest jump now is you need to develop your leadership. And that would be the gap, I would say, between one to multiple.
Well, let's jump in there. And I know I touched upon this earlier, and even off line before we shot this, I asked you, okay, Jarred, from your lens, like what were some strengths? But I also asked, because I think it's a great dynamic to get your team involved as well. And leadership, both you and Joel for that matter, I see in spades. One of the things that your team came back was triple the ownership, taking extreme ownership, which I think is just an incredible, strong characteristic of leadership. So, for you, is leadership factory installed? How have you developed that skill set? Maybe some trials, tribulations. I would just love for you to unpack that box just to showcase to our audience like what it takes and how you really develop that skill set.
Yeah, so number one, it is not factory installed at all. And if I was to be able to compare where I am today to where we were when we opened up in that first year, obviously there's a big gap between the two. And a lot of it is like anything else. It's just learning, and you're gonna make a lot of mistakes along the way. And it's just the ability to be self-aware, push your ego out of the way, eat the humble pie, and see where you can get better and grow the skills specific towards leadership. And when it comes to extreme ownership, that wasn't something, to be honest, that I'd ever really heard of, even coming into owning a location. But obviously had the very fortunate opportunity, and I believe you were there as well, to sit in on a mastermind where Jocko Willink was there running a day for us. And through his book and him and just everything that way, it was something that just really clicked. And I actually remember, in the half day after the mastermind where we had Jocko there to lead us through, it was really a roundtable discussion. And I actually brought something forward to him and said, hey, like, this happened with our team. Like, did I approach that right? Like, I think I took extreme ownership. And he was like, well, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do that? And I was like, nope. And he was like, well, it's your fault then. Again, I think when you look back on it, it doesn't matter what happens, because ultimately if someone on your team made a mistake, you hired that person. Yep. Or at least, even if you weren't the person who hired them, you should have been the person that put in the process that we go through to figure out who we're going to hire and who are the standards for hiring. And then if they made a mistake, was it because they're the wrong person, in which case, again, it's your fault because you did all that front end stuff. And if it was because that they didn't understand standards or expectations, that's your fault because you're in charge of setting the standards and expectations. And I think it's just the ability to take ownership of everything, again, just elevates you as a leader and the respect that you can get from your team. And so I think that, that's obviously one of the most important aspects of leadership, at least in my mind, but it was not factory installed. It was just learning, developing, and growing along the way.
Speaking of leadership, and one of the things that your team actually pointed out when I was, kind of connected with you offline, that you're also, though, willing to ask for help. And I think that's really interesting. That's a really strong quality of a leader, because sometimes we think, hey, we have to, have all the ego and, not be able to ask for help or take it all in. But I was curious if you can just elaborate on that point and how that's a zone of genius for you.
I think for me, the most important thing in leading anything is getting the outcome that you want. And having the ability to take the step back and do whatever is necessary to get to that outcome, because whether it's me making the decision or you making the decision, as long as we can get to the outcome together in the best way that is the best for the company, that's ultimately the only thing that really matters. So, if I can step into a situation where I may not be the most knowledgeable, why should I try to pretend that I am? And what am I gaining from doing so when my ultimate goal is to get to the outcome, knowing full well that maybe you're better suited to get us there?
Right.
So I think ultimately it's just, again, you could maybe argue that one of the most important aspects of leadership, at least in my mind, is humility, and just having, again, getting the ego out of the way to just ensure that you, your team, your company can get the outcome that we all desire. I think is really the true aspect of leadership. Of my job as a leader is to get us from here to there. How we get there, I don't really care. And there's going to be lots of times where I can't do it, or there's someone better suited to do it, or I don't know how to do it. And so you just have to have the willingness to ask the questions or get out of the way or whatever it may be.
The last line item, I think, still within this umbrella of leadership and strong business acumen. There's just a vision, a lot of characteristics that you and Joel have taken with you to be successful. Is the ability to problem solve, and I think that's so critical in terms of entrepreneurship. You just have to be able to, figure out, be creative and problem solve. Really, what it comes down to. Because even at Fit Body Bootcamp, we have the system, we have the playbook, we have the Fit Body way, but you can't account for every single business decision or things that are going to come at you, a pandemic or your landlord or a water break or whatever the case may be. How have you, that's a strength of yours, how have you developed this muscle? And is this factory installed? Do you have a natural knack for it? And how have you improved that over the years?
Yeah, I think for me that is something that I'd say I'm privileged enough, in school, university, that kind of stuff, that I was able to learn how to problem solve, for sure. But ultimately, I think the most important thing is just always asking the next question. And I really believe, as Tony Robbins says, like, if you want a better answer, ask a better question. And I think so often we identify an issue and then we just jump into, okay, let's solve it. Mm-hmm. But I think the thing that most people miss is like asking the next question. Okay, well, this is the issue that we have identified, but what's causing that issue? Or is that actually even an issue? Like, it may be a pain point, but do we actually need to solve it? And so I think problem solving for me isn't necessarily problem solving. I think it's actually being really good at asking the next or better question. Mm-hmm. Because if you can just get down to the root, then you can start actually applying potential solutions to the issue. But unless you never get there, you're not actually going to ever solve anything, because it's just going to be a routine thing that comes back because you never fixed the root issue.
Yeah. Easier said than done, but like I said, just looking from afar, you've just have a knack for it. You've done it in spades, and it's been pretty impressive. Especially, I look at COVID, and it was really challenging for humanity, for many industries, including the restaurant business, certainly the gym business as well, and specifically, Canadian restrictions were just way more crazy than the rest of the world. So you can just see this is something that you and your brother have honed really well, and I just want to be able to acknowledge you for that. So,
thank you, appreciate it.
One of the last big kind of items I want to hit on, and we're here, off script in terms of, our normal studio here in Chino Hills. We're here in our mastermind, which is a leadership coaching program. And, we like to say that leaders are learners. And this has been a big part of my journey. I know for you as well. I've been in these rooms for you for years. What would you say, or how would you say personal growth has really developed you as a person, but ultimately made you a better leader, made you a better entrepreneur, made you a better father or husband, because it all kind of, is incorporated. So I'm curious, what that looks like, your personal growth journey, and then how you've maybe some tactical ways that you've been able to grow yourself.
Like, without a doubt, I would not be where I am without being heavily invested and putting the time, energy, and effort into personal development and growth. Whether that be, like you said, we've been in the same rooms in masterminds together since day one. I actually remember attending, again, the first Fit Body World Conference. And it's funny that just learning things and then looking back on it, the good old sales tactic of urgency that was applied to help sell people into Mastermind back then, it worked. And here we are. But, I probably wouldn't have moved into taking that initiative had not that sales tactic or strategy or urgency been applied. And so I'm thankful for it because it got me to take the step forward, and I'm only here now because of that. But that applied with, I'm a constant reader. I'm always, reading books. But I think, as the good old saying goes, like, knowledge without action is futile. So I think one of the biggest areas where sometimes people struggle is I think sometimes people try to boost their ego up to say that they're always learning and they're constantly reading and they're constantly attending a mastermind, and they jump from this mastermind to that mastermind to this mastermind, and they're going to all these events, but then you look at their business and it stays stagnant. While yes, learning self-development is super valuable, and I think it is an absolute necessity in order to be successful, what's arguably as important is taking action on what you learn, and actually ensuring that you're taking it and applying it, and not just having this library that is there and yet you're never actually taking out a book. I think that is a super key thing that sometimes people struggle with, especially from the business perspective.
Dude, so much. I see that all the time, and I love you quoted Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins also says this: knowledge is not power, it's potential power. Action is power. So that is the message for you, and you've done that in spades.
Thank you.
One other kind of topic I want to dive into, we've talked about, your skill set, your background, why you've been successful, leadership, problem solving, all the things that we've been able to tactically share with our audience. But before our conversation ends, it's not all sunshines and rainbows either. So I would love it, Jarred, if you would just open up and maybe if you can think back at your years of experience running the business, what's been like one of your biggest challenges, or maybe one of your lowest entrepreneur moments. And I think there's probably a learning lesson for the audience, and I would love to dive in.
Yeah, that's business. It is never all sunshines and rainbows, and it's funny. It's one of those things that a lot of outside people looking in, you think about an entrepreneur and you think it's all glam and you're flying private jets to an island and vacationing all the time. And I can tell you, and I mean, there is no right or wrong way to live your life, and how people are happy with what they're doing is their own thing. But it is exponentially harder and more stressful, at least in my experience, to be a business owner than have a job. So it's not all sunshines and rainbows, but by far the pros outweigh the cons, at least in my experience. But one of the lowest things for me, obviously we did just go through a pandemic, but if I'm going to be honest, like the struggle going through the pandemic, it was stressful. It was more so for me at that point in time. I'll kind of bring up two scenarios that were really low points. The part that was a struggle during the pandemic was that you transitioned into an area, it was just survival. And I think, anybody can go through a struggle or a challenge like that and dive back into survival mode for a certain period of time. And we do it day to day, week to week, month to month as business owners and entrepreneurs. But when you're having to do that for like a year and a half, because of something that's completely out of your control, and never knowing like when the end point is coming, for us, because of the regulations in Canada and the pandemics, it was like the goalpost was always moving, right? Oh, well, it started out with two weeks, right? But then from 2 weeks turned into 4 weeks, turned into 6 months, turned into a year, turned into like, we didn't know when the hell this was ending. And so that became really challenging because like we lost our vision. Right? It became just like survival mode, and especially as a lot of entrepreneurs that are, they want to have a big impact and grow and scale, and it became challenging because for a year and a half, 2 years, there was none of that. It was just like dive in, and I think for that it was more of, I wasn't necessarily like, I knew Joel and I had the ability and the knowledge and the skill set to get through it. It was more just kind of like depressing, because you lost that vision. And you weren't like having the grow, and just to see clients leave every day, and that was definitely a challenge. But one thing that I think is a learning lesson that was a struggle and a challenge that I could give to, the listeners, is that Joel and I scaled too fast. And we got to a point where we didn't have our processes or systems dialed in. We didn't have the right team in place. We stepped out of the business to work on the business too quickly because we were chasing other people. We were chasing revenue. We were chasing scale when we didn't have the skill set to actually get us the thing that we were chasing in the first place. And for a while that led to issues, team issues, because we weren't giving them the resources and the tools that they needed to be successful because we didn't lay that foundation. We didn't have the leadership to lead them. And then we were also having to take revenue from one location to really feed the other two. And things were really tight for a long time. And then you can't use the profits to pour back in and grow. And so it led to a point where, we were stagnant for a decent period of time. And that, leads to a lot of stress when you're scraping by day to day. And, it's like, oh crap, we have payroll next week. I don't know if we have the funds to get it. What are we going to do? And, so that would be one parting piece of advice if I could give to people that are new gym owners that have that vision, that do want to make a big impact, that do want to grow to multi-locations, is like get all your ducks in a row in one first. Make sure your systems and your processes are dialed in, because people don't fail, systems do. But then make sure that you have a badass team in place to run those systems so that you can focus on the scale and the growth.
People don't fail, but systems do. That is a huge takeaway there. Jarred, my friend, as we wind down, a couple last questions, and actually one of them was just going to be a parting piece of wisdom, which you kind of hit, but really high level for our audience who's passionate about fitness, they want to be an entrepreneur, they want to make a big impact. From your lens, what are maybe some other one or two talking points that you can give them that will help them on their journey?
It's kind of vague and cliche, but leadership is everything. I know you've said it before. I know I've heard it. I can't remember who said it, but leadership is always the problem. Leadership is always the solution. The hard part about it is there is no book on leadership. There is no guideline or framework or step-by-step thing of like, do this now, do this now, do this now, do this now. Like there is, you could go on YouTube and how do I run a Facebook ad? Well, I follow this step-by-step guide. There isn't that when it comes to leadership. Mm-hmm. So you have to be invested in growing in that area. It is an absolute must if you're gonna create anything successful. And then the other piece I would just say, it's gonna be harder than you think it ever will be, and it's gonna take you way longer than you ever thought it will as well. So be willing to play the long game, not the short game. And that's something from Alex Hermosi that I've taken, is like when it looks at business, you don't win at business. Like the goal with business should be that the business always continues on. It's like marriage, you can't win at marriage. The goal with marriage is that the marriage continues to grow and get better forever. And so I think with business, if you're going to be successful too, you got to have that vision, play the long game, and be prepared for it to be harder than you ever thought it would be.
Good, sage advice.
Yeah.
All right, my friend, the last question for you. This is the title of this podcast, is the Fitness CEO Podcast. So from your lens, what does it mean to you to be a CEO?
For me, being a CEO really revolves around putting the right people in the right seat and giving them the tools, resources that they need to be successful. Because if you have the right people doing the right things and you are giving them the support that they need, there really isn't anything that can get in your way of slowing you down.
Mic drop, my friend. Well, this has been awesome. Before we shoot for today, I just want to acknowledge you, man. This has been an awesome ride that we've been on since 2016. It's just been a pleasure and honor to be in the trenches with you, to grow businesses together, to mastermind together, to learn from each other. You're all heart, you're all vision. I have a lot of respect for you and what you've done along with your brother. And you've made a huge impact in your community out in Alberta, Canada, and certainly our brand as well. And I just want to take a second, not only thank you for being on the show, but thank you for being who you are, and huge value add to my life and ultimately our show today. So appreciate you, buddy.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that as well. And I can tell you, I would not be where I am today without you and your guidance and your leadership either. So the mutual respect goes right back.
Oh yeah, my friend. All right, friends, I know you got a ton of value. Assuming you did, give this video a like, a subscribe on YouTube. Better yet, share it with someone in need. And that's how we continue to make this content for you for free. So Jarred, my friend, appreciate you, bro.
Thank you.
And friends, we'll see you in the next episode.